Welcome to another Wisdom for Life podcast. We're here with Senior Consultant and Psychologist Alex Hatfield and Creative Leader Grace Knowles, and we are talking today about well-being and resilience. So Alex, if we could come to you first with some explanation of what we understand well-being to be.
Wow, what a big question, John. What is well-being? So I suppose you could ask 60 different people and they would give you a different answer, but I think there might be some common themes in around what well-being means to us human beings. I think one of those common themes is about having a pleasant life in the here and now, being healthy in mind, body and soul, and having meaning and purpose in life. I think for me, personally, having meaning and purpose in life is very much linked to well-being.
Grace, anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I would say that there's like a choice element there as well, and I think it's interesting you say that different people have different ideas of what well-being is. I think it's something that is really personal, and I'd say it's kind of finding that space, whether it's kind of in your brain or whether it's something sort of physical that you do, something that's kind of like your space where you feel comfortable and happy, and just something that really makes you feel good and well. Yeah.
So that could be like a social thing or a physical thing or whatever it is, just to have that thing in your life that gives you that buzz or whatever it is.
Yeah. And
okay.
Yeah.
And Alex, you definitely mentioned it. Grace might have mentioned it. You mentioned purpose, which is we've talked about in another podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that mean without having some idea of purpose as an individual, it just makes it harder to have well-being, or is there a link between one and the other?
You know, I think for me, I think there is, and based on my knowledge of psychology and study of the field, and also my experience of just being a human being alive on the planet, there's a few elements that sort of weave together for me that form a well-being, well-being in a person. I don't think one element defines well-being. I think there's lots of things that contribute to it. When we talk about well-being as having a pleasant life in the here and now, there's a lot of research out there that has been done, particularly in the field of positive psychology, that points to 4 or 5 different ingredients, if you like, John, for
right.
well-being becoming a reality for people. One of those ingredients is positive emotion, so focusing on the positive emotions and increasing the instances of those in one's life. Happiness, life satisfaction all cover that positive emotion piece. The other one is being engaged and having engagement, so doing things that you love and doing them more often, playing on your own strengths, and expressing your strengths in the world. Again, that's another piece of well-being. Having positive and meaningful relationships with other people. I mean, we're social creatures by nature, and I think that's also another element that helps us be have well-being and also be resilient. And you know, you asked me the question around purpose, and the researcher Martin Seligman, who was one of the founding fathers of the positive psychology movement, he speaks a lot about having purpose and meaning as really important to well-being. Having aspirations, things we can accomplish, looking back on our accomplishments and celebrating ourselves, which I think in a lot of particularly Western cultures we don't do enough of. And we don't do enough of it in a way that's humble and realistic. I think we tend to switch, you know, we're quite a narcissistic society, I think, and we tend to switch between I'm not good enough or I'm super, which can both be incredible defences against having a realistic sense of self-worth, which contributes to our sense of well-being.
And we've sort of bracketed together well-being and resilience. Is it possible for you to just give us a brief explanation of how those two are linked? What's the connection?
Yeah,
between
there's a
well-being
strong
and
connection between well-being and resilience, and again, I'm going to sort of hook into the research that's been done in the positive psychology movement, and particularly around those two topics, because we may have noticed, those of us that work in a corporate environment, just how important these two topics have become in the workplace: resilience and well-being, and that's simply because there's been a lot of research done on them recently, and how when we are in a place where our well-being is high, so when we've got our bodies are well, our minds are functioning well, and our emotions, we can we have some knowledge and understanding of our emotional self, and we have a capacity to be with our emotional self but not be overwhelmed by our emotions. When those three things are in place, healthy body, healthy mind, healthy feelings, we can challenge ourselves with change. So when change comes, as we know, change is a part of all our lives. I don't know any human being that doesn't have change as a constant. And what it means is, when they're in place, healthy body, healthy mind, healthy feelings, we can engage with change a lot better and in a more meaningful way, which helps us build what we call resilience. And if you're thinking about a sort of psychological, technical term for resilience, it would be the ability to bounce back from meaningful adversity. Okay. So I think that's how they're linked for me, well-being and resilience, because if we've got healthy body, feelings and mind, we're usually more resilient, because we can usually, to use a term that I'm not happy with really, but we can usually cope more with life and living in this modern, complex, uncertain world that we live in.
And Grace, as a team leader, Alex has mentioned a couple of times engagement and having people engaged. Do you find, as leading a team of people, that that's important, that makes a difference in terms of how you perceive their well-being and their resilience?
Yeah, I think that the kind of body and the self that you bring to your work and you kind of approach life with is built around all these things, this sort of like healthy body, healthy mind, healthy spirit kind of trifecta. And I think that almost, if you, like you say, if you have that sorted and you have that down and you're well as a person, you can really like bring your best self to these challenges and these things that you might not, want to face, but kind of have to. And it's sort of those like, it's a fact of life, you've got to get through it kind of situations. These are things that can kind of can affect people's well-being, but the attitude and the way that you approach that, you can kind of just like cope with it better. Yeah. So as a leader, I think that it's important to not only think about what are people's sort of work efforts and what are they doing when they're here for these hours, but what are they actually doing in their life at home? What are they doing kind of outside of work that's inspiring them and maybe helping them bring their best self to work as well, because it's not sort of just 9 to 5 clock off, and we always know that we sometimes take things home mentally and physically sometimes we can be tired at work, but what are we doing in that other sort of realm of our life that's helping us bring our best self to work? Yeah,
and presumably if you're feeling better able to deal with challenge and change in the workplace, that will also help you deal better in your personal life, because you face challenge and change in that too, basically, outside of work. But Alex, you've mentioned change and Grace mentioned challenge. This is what I'm really interested in, is this striking this balance or walking this fine line between offering people challenge without putting them in a position where they don't feel comfortable or feel stressed or feel like it's too much for them to deal with. Is there any thoughts on how we strike that balance, how we walk that tightrope?
It's a great question, because as we've already talked about together, the two are intrinsically linked. Change and resilience are intrinsically linked. And for me, I've got the image of like walking an edge between I'm going to use some psychological terms here, so help me out with with non-psychological terms, but it's the difference between overstimulation and arousal. So arousal being am I excited really enough by this change to want to offer myself and my will and my energy to it consciously? Have I got enough of a challenge here for it to be exciting and not too scary? Or have I got around me the people and the resources and the people and the resources, have I got them around me if it is too scary, that I can, put my hand up and say, look guys, I'm finding this really stressful, or I'm finding this really scary. I feel overstimulated. And, it might not be that we use these words. We might not be psychologically mature enough even to understand we're overstimulated. But if we can recognise when we're overstimulated and ask for help, and not feel ashamed about asking for help, that's when I think we can really truly build resilience, and build resilience not only individually but on a team level, as Grace mentioned as well. As a team leader, I imagine Grace is incredibly thoughtful about how her team is in a change, and helping them as their leader, helping them through any change in terms of whether they're overstimulated or whether they're just in that peak arousal stage, which means that they are actually building resilience.
It is such a fine line, and it's like, as a leader as well, very hard to recognise where someone is on that tipping scale, because I think as a culture we've become so used to not asking for help, and it's almost like, to save face, you'd rather drown than put your hand up and let people know around you. And I think that comes down to this support thing, like when we are taking someone through a challenge and sort of guiding them through that, are we there waiting, and are we kind of like ready to support that person if something happens that is unexpected and we do get those big changes? I think that, like, as individuals, we're more willing to take these risks and do these things that are scary if we feel like we have someone kind of back there waiting for us. And as a leader, that's like a really important thing to enable your team with, to know that they have the sort of they have the ability to go and do these things, but actually you're always kind of there in the wings if they do need you.
Yeah, along with this, you mentioned, Alex, earlier on, along with Grace mentioned support there, and you mentioned earlier on about positivity.
Yes.
And positive emotion and all those sorts of emotional responses. Could you talk to us a little bit, or explain a little bit more about positive reinforcement and how that sort of fits in within this wellbeing and resilience context?
Yeah, I think I just before we do go into positive reinforcement, which I agree with you, John, I think is incredibly important in terms of building wellbeing and resilience, I think I'd probably just take a step back in relation to positive emotion, because quite often positive emotion can be used as a counter, actually, to building wellbeing and resilience, because positive emotion may come across, particularly in a work environment, as I always have to be happy. And actually, it's not realistic for us as human beings to always be happy. I think it's really important for us to understand psychologically that the more psychologically mature we become, the more we become able to be with some of our more negative feelings. So, the guilt, the shame, the loss, the grief that comes with change, because all of those things are quite natural in any changing environment.
Yeah.
Change is incredibly linked to our identity. So, for example, if I get a job change, for example, if I change my role, suddenly I'm either a team leader and I was a member of the team, or suddenly my role's completely changed. I'm losing some of my identity with that role, which means that I'm going to go through a change curve. And what I mean by the change curve is I'm going to go through some very human emotions, whether I'm conscious of them or not, some very human reactions to that change. And some of those can be quite what we class as negative. So I can feel a sense of loss, I might feel a sense of apathy, I might feel a sense of, I might, behave in a way that makes me feel a little bit guilty or ashamed. I might be thinking, am I good enough? Which is shame, really. I mean, that's the emotion of shame. Am I good enough? So first of all, I wouldn't want to make any of those feelings bad, and I wouldn't want any leader to do that either, because they're an incredibly important and human response to change. So we have to include what we class as the negative feelings and the negative emotions as well as the positive, and be with them and be mindful that not to make them bad, particularly in a work environment. Because that's when you do, as a leader, need to come in and help your person and be with them and empathise with them and walk side by side with them to help them, to what I call lend them your will, as Grace mentioned, support them and lend them your will as the leader, to help them move through those into those more positive feelings that we know are there, that we know will come after this. So it's almost like, for me, it's building well-being and resilience. It's just as important to be with the positive as with the negative, but in a positive way, than it is to be with the positive emotions.
Yeah, because if you're not allowing people to express the negative, it's all been bottled up and suppressed.
It'll go somewhere, and it'll go underground, and it usually will come out in little silo conversations, water cooler conversations. It'll come out somewhere in the system, and by that I mean the human psychological system. It'll come out somewhere, and if it's not being talked about, it goes underground. As Freud very kindly said, a little bit of a Freud quote here. Can't resist. I'm sorry. I'm a psychologist.
We can't get enough of it.
What we're unconscious of controls us, and that's true in the human being as an individual. It's also true in a human system like an organisation.
And would you say, as a team leader, you can see that great? Can you sort of remember situations where maybe an individual struggled to express the negative side of things, and it's kind of your job as a leader to, I guess, coax that out of them or make them feel comfortable to say it?
Yeah, it's difficult, and I guess you don't want to bring too much of that negativity out, because there's a risk there of it kind of affecting general sort of the environment and the general kind of vibe of the team. But I think that I love this thing you say, Alex, about bringing these negative emotions out and kind of confronting them and just being really honest, I think, about how you feel, and maybe not so much attaching good and bad and positive and negative to like the range of things that you're feeling and how you're experiencing. And I think that actually lets people know that what they are going through is valid, because we are in this sort of society where we kind of have to attach labels to everything, and you're feeling this, so this means this, and it's analysed in that kind of process. But I guess if we try and switch it to more of okay, you're feeling this, and we can build on that and work out something and go back to this positive from that, but just acknowledge it.
Yeah. I like what you're saying, Grace.
Really
it's about normalising, isn't it? Yeah, really normalising some of these natural things we go through.
So the important thing is people are expressing their feelings and their emotions rather than trying to categorise them as one thing or the other.
Yeah, it's good or bad. I think a good or bad's not helpful in well-being and resilience, because it's too binary.
Right.
It's about where's the person in the here and now. What's my job as the leader to help and support them through, as Grace mentioned, without getting too caught in the past or caught in the dynamic of it. And I think what's really important, one of the things that I've learned personally as a leader, is not to take it personally. I mean, my training's very much from a coaching and psychotherapy background, and being with somebody in a space when they really are in grief and they really are feeling that loss. And I remember when I was a team leader myself and a manager, having people kicking off about a stapler and realising it's not about the stapler, but they weren't conscious enough to understand where they were in terms of their psychology. So they weren't conscious enough to say, oh my goodness, this is all about the move. So it might be that our people, they might not necessarily come to us and sit down on a chair and say, hey John, I'm really worried about this move. They might actually start kicking off because they feel like somebody's nicked their stapler, and it's completely out of out of
That's
character for
interesting.
them.
Yeah.
And they feel more comfortable talking about a physical thing like the stapler than the emotional thing of the,
well,
the
they're
mood.
not capable. That's the thing.
Right.
That's the
Yeah.
point. It
Yeah.
might be that they're not capable of linking the two.
Mm.
And once if the leader and the manager's psychologically minded enough to say, well, actually, this is unusual for this person to be kicking off about a stapler. It's not their normal behaviour. What's really going on? And I think most of us, when we work with people and we're in a leadership role, I think most of us are savvy enough to think that's quite not normal. What's really going on?
I think it's kind of important as well to be resilient as a leader, because you do, like you say, have to learn not to take that on.
Yeah.
It's very easy to kind of think, there's people in my team that may be feeling unhappy, or sort of there's something kind of negative going on. Not sure why. It's my job to fix it, and
So
there is
important.
up to a point, but actually you can't take everything on yourself. And I love this kind. It's really simple, but thinking of it as you can't kind of like fill up anyone else's cup if yours is empty and you're kind of drained and burnt out. So I think it's almost like a bit of a cycle. Once your own well-being is top notch, you've got it sorted, you're kind of like, okay, who else can I help then? And you kind of get a bit of a cycle going. But if you're constantly giving and trying to fix everything else, and you're not really looking after yourself, then that's surely only kind of a negative thing.
Yeah.
I like that, Grace, because what I hear in what you say there is start with yourself. And I think you're absolutely right. For me, in my own experience, if I don't look after myself, first and foremost, in terms of my the three things I mentioned earlier, which was healthy body, healthy mind, healthy emotions, then how can I help anybody else?
Yeah, like that. And I think we kind of attach shame, like you say, and kind of different negative things to actually what is fundamentally looking after yourself. I mean, we're meant to do it, but we've pulled away from it, I think, because we're thinking, it's not productive to do that, and we attach like our value to that, like how much are we doing, how crazy busy are we, and like I kind of think with sleep as well, like, and these really sort of like bottom of the hierarchy of needs things that we sacrifice for weird stuff like doing loads, like maybe we don't need to do that, and we just need to have an extra hour of sleep, and then we can be a better person.
I love it.
Well, that's when you mentioned being productive there, that's kind of the crux of it to some extent for me, in that you do spend all your time thinking, I've got to do this and this, rather than sitting back and thinking, well, actually, what do I want to achieve? What's my well-being here? What's my emotional state?
It's that balance point, isn't it? I think balance is a really important word when it comes to well-being and resilience, and I love what, Grace, you've just said around what am I trading off? Am I trading off am I trading off loads of doing and being incredibly busy because it looks good to others against that extra hour's worth of sleep? And how much difference is it actually going to make if I, crucify myself at work? And I mean, I do forget the simple things sometimes, like that extra hour's sleep will actually make me more effective and more resilient. But going back to your question, John, on positive reinforcement.
Just explaining to us what it means, and then how we then go about applying that in the day-to-day, as it were.
Positive reinforcement. So the term itself is really actually quite simple. It's about how can I reinforce for myself internally in my own internal world first the positive things that I tell myself and do, like my inner voices, my inner dialogue, that help me feel like I'm having a pleasant life in the here and now, which is how we defined well-being at the beginning of this podcast. And also how I can build my resilience around those elements of positive emotion, healthy relationships, having meaning in my life, and having things that I accomplish. So my own version of this is my own version of this is really simple, actually. Rather than telling myself my old mindsets and my old stuff from, being a child and the things I grew up with to help me protect myself in my family of origin situation, like, oh, I'm not good enough, or this isn't good enough, or I haven't done this good enough. Basically anything that comes down to that root of I'm not good enough. What I would do internally with myself is say I am enough. And I just switch it and I change it, because I know that saying I'm not good enough will take me into the opposite of what helps me build well-being and resilience.
Yeah.
And actually it's not true, So me saying, oh, I'm not good enough, or I haven't done this good enough, is actually of the past. And it was something that kept me safe as a child, and something that kept me safe in an environment where I was incredibly reliant on adults to be for my health and well-being, and my resilience. But now I am an adult, I don't need to play out those patterns anymore. So my version of positive reinforcement on an internal basis is looking at how is my self-talk going in my head? And is my self-talk more geared towards what I call self-worth, which for me is defined, I define self-worth as a realistic sense of self-worth. Actually, I'd call that confidence. So confidence for me is a realistic sense of self-worth.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I confused myself.
No, that's right.
And is my inner dialogue and are my inner thoughts geared towards that, which helps me with my well-being, i.e. happy body, happy mind, happy emotions, healthy body, healthy mind, healthy emotions, and being resilient.
So is that saying I am good enough, but I could be I could still improve, or I could still be better, or is it saying
I think
I'm happy with where I am?
I think it's both and rather than an either or.
Right.
You know me by now, John. I'm not that binary.
I'm just trying to go binary.
I think it's like somewhere in the middle almost, isn't it? It's adjusting that goalpost, so you're starting from that base of I am enough, rather than I think what so many of us are kind of like accustomed to, which is starting from this inferiority of like, I'm not enough, so I have to do this, this and this to get to this point in the scale. But I guess if we kind of just bring it back to starting at that point, like I am enough, I'm always enough, I'm never not going to be enough, and then all these other things can happen around it, but that's like my core and I'm sticking to it, and I'm not moving from there.
Yeah, exactly, because usually by the time we get to the places that we're in, and a lot of our listeners will be in, we are enough. We've traversed life enough to learn a few lessons, I think. And for me it's the simple change in how I speak about myself internally that helps me to create a massive change on the outside, which benefits not only me but those I'm with, because if I can think of myself as enough, I think of everybody else as enough as well. And therefore I'm not in those power plays. Which
comes back to what Grace was saying about you as a leader in a team context. You kind of need to have that well-being and resilience in you before you can then bring it out of everyone else.
I agree. Yeah, completely. Yeah.
Excellent. Very interesting. Thanks once again, Grace and Alex, for your time.